Welcome.
Hey, this is Kevin Shinnick, writer of Star Wars Force Collector.
I'm Cameron Scott, one of the story architects of Star Wars The High Republic.
This is Dominic Pace, who plays Gekko the Bounty Hunter from The Mandalorian.
Hi, I'm Claudia Gray. I write Star Wars books.
And you're listening.
And you are listening.
And you are listening
to Star Wars Comics in Canon. The Force is strong with this one.
Hello there and welcome to Star Wars Comics in Canon, your guide to the wider Star Wars canon through the comic book lens. And to take you on this journey, I'm your host, Mike Burton. And so brings another High Republic book review. So my friends, this week I am tackling Convergence by Zoraida Córdova. Now if you haven't joined me for a book review before, especially the High Republic ones, I generally split them to 3 sections, completely spoiler free, then mild spoilers, and then I give a plot overview and give my spoilery sort of thoughts. So if you haven't picked up this book and you plan on doing so, you'll be able to listen until I give ample spoiler warnings as well, and there should be in the show notes mention of when each part of the review is, and if you're listening on YouTube it should be split into chapters anyway. But a little bit of background information around this book. So, it was released November 22nd, 2022. The author, Zoraida Córdova, has also written Galaxy's Edge, A Crash of Fate, and also one of the certain point of view stories in the Empire Strikes Back edition. And this is the first, in air quotes, adult book from the High Republic Phase 2. So the High Republic Phase 1 was set 200 years before the Skywalker Saga, specifically 200 years before the Phantom Menace, so it was around 232 years before the Battle of Yavin. Now Phase 2 of the High Republic is a prequel, so it takes 150 years before Phase 1 of the High Republic, which means it's about 350 years before the Skywalker Saga, so it's approximately 382 years before the Battle of Yavin. Now in Phase 1 there were 3 waves of content, each wave was about 6 months inside the timeline, and outside of the timeline it was us waiting about 6 months for pieces of content, and each wave generally had a collection of comics, normally the Adventures line and the main run as well as a mini-series, plus there was an adult, a young adult and a junior novel per wave, and then on the second and third waves there was some extra stuff like there might have been an audio drama, an extra mini-series or things like that, some with IDW publishing that were comics, others weren't, but I've delved into all of that in my High Republic book reviews of the other stuff and also when I've tackled the comics and etc. So if you want to hear a good overview of the High Republic, you can listen to any of my Phase 1 book reviews of Light of the Jedi, Fallen Star and Rising Storm, or I've also done all the junior novels and the young adult novels and the comics and everything really. The audio drama Tempest Runner I tackle somewhat in the Rising Storm book review, but in this phase I'm going to be doing an own episode on the Battle of Jedha audiobook, but I'll delve into that when it comes. So in Phase 2, there's only going to be 2 waves, and there's a lot of duality themes as well, so I wonder if that was intentional. But there's 2 waves of Phase 2. We are in the first wave at the moment, and then the second wave kicks off in, I believe, early April when Cataclysm by Lydia Kang comes out. And in Phase 1, the way it generally worked was the adult book kicked off the phase, and then the junior novel kind of went alongside that, and then the young adult novel took place a little bit of time after the adult novel, usually. It wasn't always the case. And then there were the comics as well, and each sort of 5 Marvel comics per wave, and in the IDW publishing ones, I think it was every 4 comics. So that was like a general idea of how that went. Phase 2 is slightly different, because also in Phase 1, they released a lot of things at the same time, whereas in Phase 2, they seem to be spreading out a little bit. So Phase 2 actually started with Path of Deceit. It's a young adult novel by Justina Ireland and Tessa Gratton, and in my opinion it's one of the best, not only High Republic books, but one of the best Star Wars books. It is absolutely fantastic. I hugely recommend people check that out. It is like the number 1 book I'm saying people need to pick up and read if you're going to delve into the High Republic, especially Phase 2, but it is a must read to understand what's going on in the background, especially one of the sects that is somewhat force using, but I'll delve into all of that as we kind of get there because we're still in the spoiler free section. But definitely read Path of Deceit, that is a must read. Quest for the Hidden City was good fun, and there's little mentions of that in the Battle of Jedha audio drama, but in Convergence is not a must read. But as I say, I have done book reviews of Path of Deceit and Quest for the Hidden City, so if you want a good overview of what goes on in those books, check out those book reviews. And if you want a central place where they're all held, on youtube.com/genuine Chit-Chat, there is a High Republic playlist, and it's got everything in there in relative chronological order. And I will also note here that Convergence is a must-read, not just for the High Republic in general, but especially for the Battle of Jeddah audio drama. If you plan on listening to that, Convergence gets spoiled almost immediately if you listen to that. I believe that when they released a little snippet of the audio drama, a lot of people were upset online because, again, it spoiled what happens in this book. So you have to be kind of careful with the High Republic stuff. Normally you can just kind of pick up bits and pieces as it goes, but even the comics, I think around issue 4, starts to kind of go across what happens in the audio drama. So I'd kind of pause comic reading until I'd finished Convergence. Now, the way I would describe Convergence is a political thriller / war / love story in some ways. That latter part love story, less so. It's more of like a platonic respect for two people, but there's other elements of it, but I'll kind of delve into that as we get into the more spoilery sections. But first off, I really enjoyed this book. I thought it was fantastic. The first couple of chapters, I was like, okay, this is interesting where they're sort of going. But after sort of the maybe 8th chapter or so, it really got into things. So maybe a quarter of the way through the book, maybe a fifth through the book. Obviously with these adult novels, there's a lot to deal with. There's a lot to take in. There are so many characters and so many elements that I often have to take notes, especially when I'm doing these sort of reviews. I have to take notes as I go through just to remind me of certain places, especially if I have a period of time where I don't quite have the time to read if I'm doing a lot of comic stuff and other podcasting things. So I find writing notes about these things really helps me out. Now, what I've done in previous book reviews is I've read the crawl and the blurb at certain points. What I'm going to do is I'm going to read the crawl now because the crawl has no spoilers at all and it gives you a good idea of kind of what the state of the galaxy is, and then from there I'll talk very lightly about some of my thoughts on the book without spoilers. So here is the crawl. It is a time of great exploration. In an effort to unite the galaxy, the Chancellors of the Republic, working alongside the courageous Jedi Knights, have dispatched dozens of Pathfinder teams into the farthest reaches of the Outer Rim. But it is also a time of great uncertainty. Communication is unreliable, and tall tales of mysterious planets and monstrous creatures abound. Prospectors and pirates roam the frontier, and the worlds of Eiram and E'ronoh are locked in a forever war. And on the far-off planet of Dalna, a new threat to the galaxy is beginning to emerge. So each of those elements kind of tackle a different book in Phase 2. So the first thing about Pathfinder teams, that's all about Quest for the Hidden City. Really recommend that if you want some like exploration-y kind of stories. The time for uncertainty and the war between Eiram and E'ronoh, that's in this book. And then on the planet of Dalna, that's where Path of Deceit takes place. So it's a good crawl to kind of touch on each of the elements that make up this phase. Now, what's also interesting about the two main planets in this is Eiram, E-I-R-A-M, and E'ronoh, which is E'-R-O-N-O-H. When I was reading it, like partway through, I kept changing how I was kind of reading it in my head. And then when I listened to the audio drama, I think it made a bit more sense because they read it out loud. I know there's a little bit of controversy about how they pronounce certain things in the audiobooks and audio dramas. I know in Phase 1, Mar-Chi-On-Ro was what all of the audiobooks said, even though Charles Soule said it's meant to be Mar-Ki-On-Ro. I know that was like a little joke at Star Wars Celebration last year. But I'm just going to say Eiram and E'ronoh, just to clarify. So they're the things I'm saying. Apologies if I offend anyone with my mispronunciation. I'm trying to go vaguely with what the audio drama kind of nodded at. So this book, as I said, is all about this war between two worlds. Now, if you have read the young adult novel Into the Dark from Phase 1, Wave 1 of the High Republic, then you'll know about the character Orla Jareni and Cohmac Vitus. Now, those two characters are mentioned in the comics and in other books as well, but specifically in Into the Dark, there are flashbacks with Orla Jareni and Cohmac Vitus about them on the planets of E'ronoh and Eiram, and it's set in the time of Phase 1 of the High Republic, but a few decades prior. So we kind of, to a degree, already know a little bit of what happens to them. So you may remember that if you have read Into the Dark. In my book review, I can't remember if I really mentioned it that much, because it seemed to be more of a thing relevant to Orla Jareni as a person, less so than the galaxy as a whole. But I know that the High Republic authors and architects have got lots of little breadcrumbs across all different pieces of content in the comics as High Republic stuff. In Cavan Scott's audio drama, Dooku Jedi Lost, there's High Republic stuff. So there's bits and pieces have been sprinkled along, and especially in the High Republic, there's a lot of stuff that hints to other parts. So I kind of already knew a little bit about Eiram and E'ronoh because it's been mentioned, and they're in this, like the Forever War has been mentioned in the past, and there's always been quite high tensions between the two planets. But I really liked how in this story it kind of delves into it, and it kind of explains how war can start, how war can continue, what kind of war ends up fostering, and what kind of people war can often create. but it also shows like how similar people are often when they are warring with each other. So I really like that element of things. That's quite a common theme, I think, in this, which is, prejudice and believing in the other. And then actually when you get to know the other, you realize they're actually incredibly similar to you. And that's obviously a lesson that a lot of individuals spread in this world we live in, saying there's a lot more things that hold us together, that connect us as individuals, that are similarities, as opposed to things that actually make us different and push us apart, which is quite a nice message. And this book definitely delves into it. Now, another part about this book is that I noticed they did this with the audio drama as well, but I think that's kind of split it up to make it a bit easier. But in this book, it's split into parts. So there's 4 parts, and that's bargain, fuse, spark, and collision. And one of the things I really liked about this book is that it's quite unpredictable in a lot of ways. At the start, there's a couple of sort of things that happen and you're like, oh, I can kind of see where this is going. And then it just gets there immediately, like within a couple chapters. So a lot of the things that you think are, this is going to take the whole book for this character and this character to do this thing. And then you realize, oh no, it's literally happening like moments after. So I really like that element. And there's a lot of stuff that happened I didn't expect. I'm not going to delve into it here or even hint at it because, this is the spoiler-free section. But a lot of the characters I found really, really interesting. Pretty much all of these ones are new characters. There was like 1 or 2 that's kind of maybe been mentioned in the other ones, but generally this is a whole new host of characters. You get a really good insight into how the Republic and the Chancellors are working at the moment, because in this phase of the High Republic, you've got 2 Chancellors. You've got Greylark and you've got Mollo. And I don't think it's happened prior to this or since then of having 2 different Chancellors. One kind of sits in Coruscant and deals with, the inner worlds, the core worlds, and the sort of details and minutiae of politics, whereas the other one is more so on the frontier, going around to the worlds that need a lot of aid, trying to kind of help the people on the outer echelon of the galaxy, or at least the known galaxy, because this is still very much a time of exploration. So I really liked that. I thought the Jedi characters in this were really cool. I thought the non-Jedi characters were really cool. In the High Republic, the Jedi characters were the thing I was looking most forward to. But there's a lot of really, really cool characters who are not Jedi at all. And that's quite a common theme in this phase I've noticed as well, especially in this wave, is about the perception of Jedi and Force users to those who do not have the power of the Force, who cannot commune with the Force in that way. So it's kind of like non-Force users and their perception of Force users, because we don't really get that in the prequels very much. We get it sort of a little bit in bits and pieces. The Clone Wars touches upon it a smidge, but we don't really delve into it. And I really like that the High Republic is tackling those sorts of issues. Now, I found that Zoraida Córdova's writing was fantastic as well. I think some of the descriptions that she wrote were brilliant, as well as how the characters were. The dialogue's quite snappy and good in the ways it needs to be, but there's also heartfelt elements and emotions. I thought that was really cool. The plot, although it does kind of jut about the place a little bit, I didn't find it as confusing or as mind-melting as Light of the Jedi, which, although I think that book is fantastic, it's so much to deal with and so much to take in that it's quite overwhelming. And a part of me was a little bit concerned that this book would be the same because, it's an adult book, there's 330 odd pages in this, the font's small, there's a lot of text on each page, you can probably read like 3 or 4 junior novels in the time it takes you to read like one of these, if that. So I was a little bit concerned about that element, but once again, this book really, really hit it out of the park. I think this is up there with the other adult books in the High Republic. For me, I think The Rising Storm is still my favourite High Republic adult book. I think Path of Deceit might be my favourite High Republic book overall. It's very, very close to The Rising Storm, if not maybe a little bit better. I say better, it's subjective. It's more how much I enjoyed it. I think what helps the young adult books is they are a little bit shorter than the adult novels. They're normally 100 pages or so shorter. So when you get a young adult novel that really hits out of the park, it really feels like there's no wasted space. Whereas even though I love the adult books, there are a couple of chapters in all of them where you're like, okay, this is just like a setup for whatever's going to happen next. And although it's important, it's not that exciting necessarily to read. And that's just one of those things when you get longer books, it's just part of it. But I think this is definitely up there. I'd say, I really like The Fallen Star. I love Claudia Gray as an author, but I think I enjoyed this book a bit more. Primarily, I blame the marketing around The Fallen Star, because by the name and by a lot of the marketing things around it and the cover of one of the comics that was released nearby, there were pretty big spoilers of what was going to happen in the book. So it was kind of like a waiting game of what was going to happen. Whereas with Convergence, apart from a very tiny thing, and this is very, very, very mild spoilers, but this threat doesn't come up. I knew that the planets and the systems of Eiram and E'ronoh had to exist in some form because, as I said, they were mentioned in Into the Dark. But just to clarify, that's the only mild spoiler thing. But I found this book really set the scene well. I think that the writing of it's brilliant, the characters are really interesting, and you do get attached and you do want to know what happens. You know, there were points where I'd finish the book and it would be like 1 a.m, and I'd be like, do I have time to read more? Do I not? Kind of umming and ahhing. Whereas I found with some of the other High Republic books, I wasn't quite as drawn to finish it. It was more so, I need to finish this because I need to get a book review out, or there's this other piece of content coming out that I really want to read and I know I have to read this beforehand. With Convergence, I didn't really find that. I just found that as I started it, I was really interested. I don't really know how I feel about books being split into like part 1, part 2, part 3, part 4 sort of stuff. You know, Daniel Jose Older did it in Midnight Horizon. I think a book split into 5 or 6. I don't really find it adds anything. Maybe it does, and maybe it's just me, but if a book's already got chapters, which one would hope it does, otherwise it's just a verbal mess. But when a book has got chapters, that's what splits one scene from another apart. And I don't really see the need for parts unless there's like a substantial time jump. Now in this book there are time jumps, to be fair. There are small time jumps by a couple days or a couple weeks in between each parts from what I can recall, so maybe that's a reason for it. But I don't know, maybe in the part when it comes up saying part 1 bargain and part 2 fuse and things like that, maybe it should say 1 week later or 2 weeks later. I don't know if that'd ruin the story a little bit, but I just don't really know how I feel about the parts. It didn't really take away from the book. It was just like, oh, turn a page, oh, part, whatever, okay, I don't really care. I did find that to a degree, the parts kind of led you on a little bit. I think maybe that was the intention because, part 1 being called the bargain, then part 2 being called the fuse, and then part 3 being called the spark, and then when you enter part 3, the spark, you think, well, something's going to happen. But I suppose that when you're in the 3rd quarter of a book, that should be when all the major stuff happens anyway, so I don't know, maybe I'm just waffling and rambling about things that don't really seem to matter. But in very, very brief terms, the way this book kind of starts and the kind of why the events of this book are important and things is you've got E'ronoh and Eiram's forever war, and then one of the systems asks for help from the Republic, and then the Jedi get sent out as well to try and assist with matters. So there's this big, obviously, war going on, people are killing each other, and it just kind of unfolds as to what the Jedi's input and the Republic's input, how that somewhat helps, how that somewhat hinders, and how these worlds that are colliding together, how they can try in some ways to find peace. And so it's exploring that quite a lot, and I really enjoyed that. And obviously there's some foul play afoot because although the book is quite a thriller in itself because of just the politics of it, I feel like you kind of know going in, there's always going to be some sort of antagonist, As much as I probably would read a book, I don't think many people are going to pick up a book and just read about really easygoing, oh yeah, this thing was going to happen, and it went off without a hitch. Yeah, we went there to sign this thing, and we just signed it and left, and everyone was happy. Like, I would probably quite enjoy to read a book where almost nothing negative in that regard happens, but, there's always got to be some sort of disequilibrium, otherwise there's not really much of a story. But that's going to be more or less it for the spoiler-free thoughts. So that was an overview of Phase 2, Wave 1, and a little bit of hints of what's to sort of come with the High Republic in that regard, and then also my general thoughts of the book. So thought it was fantastic. My current High Republic book rankings, if I just say the adult books, is probably The Rising Storm, then maybe this one, then Light of the Jedi. This and Light of the Jedi are probably neck and neck, and then Fallen Star. Compared to the young adult novels, I think Path of Deceit is a bit more enjoyable than this one. However, I think that Path of Deceit, as I said, is arguably the best High Republic book. So taking that out of the equation, I think Convergence is more enjoyable for me / better than all the young adult books from Phase 1, and also probably better than a lot of the junior novels. It's definitely up there with amidst the best of the High Republic novels, I would say, which is quite interesting because the junior novel of this wave I found to be the weakest junior novel, but the young adult I found to be the best young adult. So I suppose it's only fitting that the adult is also amidst the top of the adult books. Or maybe it's kind of in the middle. I don't know. It's a really good book. I really recommend people check this out. But I'm going to give you now your spoiler warnings that we are now going to delve into slightly more spoilery stuff. So I'm still not going to spoil the whole plot. I'm only going to talk about sort of elements of characters, a little bit more information on themes, and then a little bit about the sort of earlier plot of this. My general idea of this is to not go far the first sort of fifth of the book, because then, no major spoilers, that sort of thing. So that's an idea of where to go. I'm just going to read the blurb of this because it gives a bit more setting the scene and a little bit more information on some of the characters, and then I'll kind of build it off from there. So here is the blurb. It is an age of exploration. Jedi travel the galaxy, expanding their understanding of the Force and all the worlds and beings connected by it. Meanwhile, the Republic, led by its two Chancellors, works to unite worlds in an ever-growing community among near and distant stars. On the close orbiting planets of Eiram and E'ronoh, the growing pains of a galaxy with limited resources but unlimited ambition are felt keenly. Their hatred for each other has fueled half a decade of escalating conflict, and it now threatens to consume surrounding systems. The last hope for peace emerges when heirs from the two planets' royal families plan to marry. Before lasting peace can be established, an assassination attempt targeting the couples tilts Eiram and E'ronoh back into all-out war. To save both worlds, Jedi Knight Gella Nattai volunteers to uncover the culprit, while Chancellor Kyong appoints her son, Axel Greylark, to represent the Republic's interests in the investigation. But Axel's deep distrust of the Jedi sparks against Gella's faith in the Force. She's never met such a puffed-up, privileged party boy, and he's never met a more self-serious, relentless do-gooder. The more they work to untangle the shadowy web of the investigation, the more complicated the conspiracy appears to be. With accusations flying and potential enemies in every shadow, the pair will have to work together to have any hope in bringing the truth to light and saving both worlds. So that kind of sets the scene for you. As I've said, I think in prior book reviews, I don't actually read the blurb for any of the High Republic books before reading them, because I know I'm going to buy it anyway, and I want to know as little as possible going in, especially with, what I said before about the Fallen Star stuff, where I kind of had it half spoiled for me because of the marketing and things. So I generally don't read the blurb. I know it's maybe hypocritical to read it out to yourselves, but I do give fair warning and things, and I suspect that you expect when you listen to a book review, after the spoiler warnings, you're going to get some spoilers. So I do find that is mild spoiler territory, but as I said, when I was reading this book and the first few chapters seemed to kind of meander a little bit, around, by chapter 10 at the latest, I was completely bought in, and chapter 10 is probably where the blurb kind of catches up to. By then you've got Phan-Tu and Xiri, who are the respective prince and princesses from Eiram and E'ronoh. That's when they agree they're going to try and marry, to try and put an end to this bloodshed, and then also that's when the Jedi start to get more involved. So talking a little bit more in depth about how it sort of starts. So there's this big action scene and there's this attack going on and ships flying about and someone's trying to transport medical supplies, I think it is, from one place to another. And these two planets, they are stuck in orbit together, but there's a moon in between them that kind of ties them together. So it's kind of like a marble between two bowling balls, maybe, or maybe the size of that is a little bit off, or maybe like a baseball sort of size between sort of two bowling balls. And it's almost like the two bowling balls are spinning around this baseball sort of perfectly. And so it's got this strange kind of connection that a lot of worlds don't have. It's like this duality once again, which is a big theme that keeps coming up in phase 2. It's phase 2, there's only two waves, there's obviously Jedi and Padawan, which always means two people in a lot of ways. The Pathfinder teams, they've got two Jedi in it. You've got Eiram and E'ronoh, the two worlds. You've got a lot of deception and things, so the front-facing face, and then also kind of what goes on behind closed doors. There's so much duality in Phase 2 of the High Republic, and I really, really enjoy it. And I think it really adds and helps a lot of the themes going forward. So the book kind of starts with someone being a degree of some sort of saboteur, someone who's trying to kind of cause chaos in a lot of ways. And there's actually two of them, unsurprisingly. And so it's about these people who are trying to cause corruption and problems for some reason. I know the reason why, and I can't remember if they say it in the first chapter, so I'm going to hold that off till I do my spoilery review. But you've just got these people trying to cause chaos, trying to hurt the royals. So you've got these two planets, one has a monarch, one has a queen, so it's kind of like a king and a queen, but they call it a monarch, we're not going to delve into the minutiae there. But you've got Captain Xiri Albaran, who is the princess, and she fights for E'ronoh, and she's like a warrior princess. Then you've got Lord Phan-Tu Zen, and Phan-Tu is the son of the Queen Adriala, and he is adopted because Adriala's partner is her wife, so they adopted Phan-Tu, but they're both around 25 years old, this Xiri and Phan-Tu, and they're on opposing sides, and as I said in the blurb that I just read, some circumstances occur, Phan-Tu saves Xiri's life, and then they kind of get to talking a little bit after they've been fighting to some degree, although Phan-Tu's not much of a fighter, and it starts to kind of unravel that they're maybe we can figure out a way to try and foster peace among our worlds, because our friends are dying, our families are dying, we're suffering with drought and famine, we've got no food, we've got no resources, everything is just falling apart. The infrastructure on the planet is just balanced on this war that's been going on for 5 years, and both planets just keep investing more and more money in warfare. There's a line, I think, later on in the book, which is the politicians actually they start in politics, but they end up just becoming war generals because politics doesn't actually really seem to do anything with these two worlds, which I thought was quite an interesting perspective and quite worrying. That imagine if you go to war and then all your politicians just basically become generals. So lots of interesting elements there, and I'm sure there's a lot of social commentary going on, more than the stuff I've already elaborated on. But those are the two sort of central characters. They are the main characters. They've both been through loss that they blame the other planet for. They are both, very loyal to their own respective planets, but they're also young and it's a new generation. They're not kind of stuck in their ways as much. So it's really interesting seeing that. Then there's the Jedi, Gella Nattai. Now I thought maybe it was Gella because there's one point in this book where her name gets misread as Jelly. And so I was like, oh, have I been reading it wrong this whole time? But then her name is mentioned in the Battle of Jeddah audio drama and they do say Gella. So I'm like, I don't know if it's one of the Marchion-Ro things, but I pronounced it as Gella Nattai. And she's about 30 years old. And you're first introduced to her basically by saying she was the leader of a pathfinding team and it recently failed. So she's kind of been knocked back a little bit in kind of her progression as a Jedi. And then you meet Enya Keen, who is a Padawan. She's about 20. She's the Padawan of Char-Ryl-Roy, who is a Saurian. Saurians, Coyote-Mundi, that's the most famous Saurian I think you'd know from the canon. Megan nicknames him Turnip Head, so it's the gentleman with very large, because Saurians have very large heads. I believe they have like 2 brains. And in Legends, there was loads of stuff about Saurians and Coyote-Mundi. There was like the Star Wars line of comics in the late 90s were all about Coyote-Mundi for the first like arc or 2. So Saurian culture is massive in Legends, and I think they're slowly trying to kind of reintroduce it into the canon. But Char-Ryl-Roy, he is a Saurian, and he is very close to another master who is Creighton's son. Creighton seems to be around 40 years old, and he's like a big, stoic, clean-shaven man. And he is one of the main characters that does appear in some other content, but I'll explain where he appears later. Then you've got Axel Greylark, the Chancellor's son, who was mentioned once again in The Crawl. He's kind of this party boy. He doesn't really care about anything. And then this kind of journey he goes on tries to teach him, information about the world and life and his privilege and those sorts of things. He's got a cute little droid companion he calls Quinn. That's QN1. It's got a lot of hidden compartments and it was actually put towards Axel due to a traumatic event that he experienced, which I'm not going to delve into here. And so it's like a therapy droid. Then you get the 2 Chancellors. You've got Kion Greylark, who is Axel's mum. She's the one who is in Coruscant and things. And you've got Orlan Mollo, who is the one who is kind of on the frontier, on the outer rim, that sort of thing. Mollo is a Quarren, and it's mentioned about the Mon Calamari Wars. So in the canon, we saw that in the Clone Wars, where you've got the Quarren people fighting with the Mon Calamari. Mon Calamari, that's the species that Admiral Akbar is, and the Quarren is there's some squid people in Star Wars. They're in almost every Star Wars movie. They're in a lot of the Star Wars series. So if you see, there's generally 2 type of fish people in Star Wars. One looks like a giant goldfish head, like Admiral Akbar. That's the Mon Calamari. And then you've got the Quarren, who look more like a squid. They've kind of triangular heads and tentacles coming down. They've been in civil war over Mon Cala for clearly centuries because they're 2 different sort of water-dwelling species that can survive on land. And so there's just always a fight over resources. And just Greylark being kind of a politician through and through and being in the heart of Coruscant, and then Mollo being a person who's kind of grown up through war and wants to be out in the frontier meeting all these people, that really shows sort of the differences in what a politician and what a chancellor or a leader of a political party or systems or whatever can actually be. And it's really interesting having sort of 2 things, and you kind of see as it unfolds, they both have their own agendas to a degree. Neither of them are nefarious. They both believe that certain elements of being in charge is more important than the other. Understandably, one believes you should be on Coruscant and doing legislation and talking to politicians, while the other one's like, no, we should be out there on the front lines seeing what the galaxy is really like. So I really like their dynamic too. And you've also got the 2 different planets. So you've got E'ronoh is like dusty and it's very much like a deserty sort of planet, whereas Eiram is all oceans and things. They both have like habitable land on, and I believe that E'ronoh used to have water on it and stuff, but in essence, one's primarily water and one's primarily land. So it's this kind of, again, 2 sides of the coin. How do you survive as a planet where you need land and water generally? Well, these planets have kind of got an abundance of the opposite, which just goes to show from a very early on how much these planets really need each other. And that's a theme that you kind of learn as you go through this book. And it's like, oh, we haven't got this thing. And it's like, well, we've got way too much of that thing. We need this thing. And they're like, oh, well, we've got loads of that. It's that kind of thing. It's almost like, Eiram's got enough water to drink, but it's barely got any food, whereas E'ronoh's the other way around. It's kind of like that. It's a bit more complex, but I'm just kind of paraphrasing for yourselves. There's also a couple of little Force things in here that I thought were quite cool that don't really spoil anything. There's something called the Aerial Walk, and it seems to be that the priestess of the Singing Mountain can do it, where you can essentially levitate and then slowly sort of walk while you're levitating, either upwards or across and things. There's one or two Jedi that kind of try and do that in this. It doesn't come up a huge amount. It's more a little bit at the start and a little bit at the end, but I quite like that idea of this Force aerial walk. And then also at one point, one of the Jedi notes psychometry, which is a power that only, I think, 3 Jedi in the canon have explicitly got. People think Rey might have it, but you've got Cal Kestis from the Jedi games, so Jedi Fallen Order and the upcoming Jedi Survivor. You've got Quinlan Vos, who is major in Star Wars Legends, but in the canon he was named in Kenobi and he was shown in like a arc of the Clone Wars, and he was in the Dark Disciple book by Christy Golden, which is fantastic. I hugely recommend that to any Clone Wars fans. And the other character is Kar, who is the main character in the Force Collector book. And the Force Collector is a book that I reviewed a couple episodes ago, and I had the pleasure of speaking with the author, Kevin Shinnick, as well. So go check that out if you want to hear more about that book. But psychometry is essentially you touch an object and then you feel its Force reverberations and see visions about it. So a really easy way to show it is when Rey touches Anakin Skywalker in The Force Awakens in Maz Kanata's castle, she has that big Force vision where everything's like changing around her and she's walking on what seems to be a Star Destroyer, and then she sees the Knights of Ren, the destroyed temple, all that kind of stuff, and then she flashes back and she's all like freaked out. That is kind of what you get with psychometry. It varies, I think, dependent on the Force user and the strength of the Force like echo that's been imprinted onto the item itself, but that's a good idea. You touch something and you get a vision about it, either of the last person who touched it or something significant that's happened to it. Those sorts of ideas. It's used differently in storytelling, but only a little bit differently. It's kind of tweaks, man. I just kind of interpret that as different Force users being able to use the same Force power, but their own kind of way of doing it. But I love that power. I think it's interesting. It's never brought up again in this book. I just want to bring it up because I love talking about it. So that was a bit of a red herring from me. So yeah, the main sort of part of this book and the central part, and as again, this is kind of building off the blurb a little bit, is that Xiri and Phan-Tu both want peace for their respective worlds. They're sick of the war, they're sick of the destruction and all the people and family and friends getting killed. So they're trying to work out how best to solve this. And obviously, as the blurb said, they decide to marry. And then in doing that, they decide they need to travel around the world and go visit all these people and show them that, look, we are together, we're putting an end to this war, we're worthy, blah, blah, blah. Let's kind of try and go ahead, unite the people who are especially on the sort of the outer reaches of certain civilizations. And so it's their kind of journey. And you've got Axel Greylark with them, who is, for lack of a better word, bit of a dick. And then you've got Gella Nattai, who is very serious about a lot of elements. Now, I really like all the characters in this. Axel Greylark is very intriguing. I'll delve into more of my thoughts about him when I get into the spoiler parts, because his story as it unfolds is very, very interesting. If you haven't read this book yet, he is one to watch, I would say that. But it's just all these different perspectives I really enjoy, and how these different characters are kind of, they learn to, when there's things that they disagree on, they try where they can to be civil about it and learn from each other. Whereas in the elements that they are similar, they kind of connect them and draw them together. There's a lot of like characters being drawn together by things. Obviously the answer to that is where they're being drawn together by the Force, and characters even say that at certain points. But that kind of idea, I really like that element of things. Now, there is plenty of action in this. There's a lot of honor stuff that goes on. There's a lot of intrigue with certain creatures that appear on both worlds. Like each world's got their own kind of scorpion, and the scorpions kind of represent different things. There's a lot of history about these worlds in particular. You know, a lot of folklore, myth, and legends and all these kind of things. So I really, really find that element interesting. And the way the book's pacing is really good. I think the ending is maybe the weakest part, but that's not a slight on the book itself. I just think that the middle is so good. There's a part where the 4 main characters are kind of just traveling together. Xiri, Phan-Tu, Axel Greylark, and Gella Nattai. They're also with Quinn, the droid, the whole time, but he doesn't have any dialogue, so he doesn't quite count in the same way. But there's a large chunk of the book where it's just the 4 of them going from village to village or settlement to settlement, and how each settlement kind of views the marriage of Phan-Tu and Xiri differently. And it's really interesting. I found the ending was cool, but it was quite actiony, and I do like that, but I was just really enthralled by the culture, and I felt like I could have probably added another, not me personally, but I could have easily read another several chapters of them just kind of going around the planets, talking to locals and seeing how different people perceive certain elements, because there's a lot of little nuggets of information that I found to be really interesting there. So I think that's my somewhat spoiler-free-ish review of the book. So this is now the thing I will say to people. If you're planning on picking up this book, you're planning on reading it, please stop this review. Go listen to all my other content, that's fine. But please stop this review and go either listen to the audiobook of Convergence or pick it up and read it yourself, because it is really, really good. And I'm going to say some of the spoilers for it now, because the book's been out for about 5 months, so I think that's ample time, giving you a lot of warning. But I really, really recommend this book. I think it's absolutely brilliant. So this is your spoiler warning going forward. So I'll start off with the plot. So basically, as I said, kind of in the last part, the four characters, Xiri, Phan-Tu, Gella and Axel, go off and then go to various settlements and things. And in the meantime, you've got Creighton's son, his friend Char-Ryl-Roy, and also the Padawan Enya trying to work out what's kind of going on. Now, the characters that are introduced in the first, I think, chapter or so that pop up a little bit here and there, there's Abda and Serena. They're both a species of cage, which I don't really recognize, but they work for the Path of the Open Hand. Now, the Path of the Open Hand are a central part of this phase of the High Republic. They're the main parts of Path of Deceit, which is, again, I love that book. I think they're going to be a main part of Path of Vengeance, so I'm very excited about that. But they are present in this book. They are mentioned in passing in Quest for the Hidden City. In the Battle of Jeddah, they are like really, really central to it as well. So I think they're kind of being the antagonists to a degree in this phase of the High Republic. So Abda and Serena are trying to cause havoc. They sabotage a fighter, and it was meant for Xiri, the princess, but it ends up killing one of her friends, like squadron mates, and so that kind of somewhat causes the events to happen as they do, because, you know, the E'ronoh and Eiram people are like, why did that ship just randomly crash over there? That seemed a bit peculiar. Maybe there's more here afoot. So it goes into that, and then there's also this guy called Viceroy Ferrell, who is a toxic, despicable, disgusting person, and Zoraida Córdova does a fantastic job of writing him, because within 3 lines of dialogue, you hate him. You know, you can tell there's something not quite right with him. You just want him to die. At least I did. Maybe I'm too vengeful for Star Wars, but I'm just always like, he seems a bit of a dick. Kill him. But I really, really didn't. I loved him as a character, but I hated him as a person, which is the real great way to write an antagonist or a villain. So again, really, really enjoyed that element of the character. The Jedi are all fairly interesting. You know, Gella being the main character there, she has 2 purple lightsabers. She is quite impulsive, but she does also love routine. She has a lot of intuition. The way she kind of has the Force with her is just a lot of gut feelings in a way, which I personally really connected to, because that's, you know, I don't necessarily believe in the Force, but I do believe my general worldview is there's energy that connects all of us, and I don't necessarily believe in a god or a deity. I just think the universe's consciousness is just combined up of every living being's consciousness to create this kind of beyond comprehension super consciousness, as it were. I don't believe that's a deity. I don't even believe that consciousness I've mentioned has its own thoughts and things. I just kind of believe that everything is interconnected, and maybe there's a way to tune into the ripples of the universe in some degree. Once again, not saying I believe in the Jedi or the Sith or the magic powers, that sort of stuff, but there are times where people say they have an intuition or they have a feeling. Some people say it's the voice of God or whatever, but people feel some sort of pull or some sort of desire or need to go into certain directions, and from that, that's where my kind of connection with Star Wars in a lot of ways lies, in the philosophy of it all. Just everything is interconnected through life and through light in that sort of way, and Gella is very much the personification of that in a way. That's kind of, it really represents how I feel and how I connect with the universe in certain ways. The reason I started my podcast, there was kind of a gut feeling when I first started really delving into podcasting with Star Wars stuff. Gut feeling again. When I reached out to certain guests of mine that have been really big guests, or ones that I've been incredibly proud to have spoken with, a lot of Star Wars authors and things, I have gut feelings. When there's negative stuff as well, I've had them too. So when she describes her connection with the Force to a degree, with this intuition, this feeling that she gets, that's, you kind of get it a little bit Finn in The Rise of Skywalker, actually, where he just kind of has it a little bit too, although I don't think they delve into Finn's Force sensitivity anywhere near enough in that film. I don't think they do enough with Finn in that film, apart from his hair being really cool. They kind of screwed his character up a little bit from him not being front and center, but that's a whole nother discussion. But that's a really good way of doing it. I like the fact that she's also got purple bladed lightsabers as well. I wonder if that is going to bring further fruit to what's going to happen with her character, because, you know, this is the spoiler part, so I can say to you that she does survive, but she is very interesting. She's a very interesting character, and the way this book ends is she decides to go off and be a way seeker. Now, a way seeker is what Orla Jareni is in the Phase 1 of the High Republic, and it's basically someone who doesn't take on a Padawan, doesn't join the Jedi Council, doesn't have like an explicit role or connection to a temple in the Force. They have to ask the Council for permission, and if granted, they just go off into the galaxy, kind of going where they feel like it. Now, I feel like for me, I would love that. I would probably still have to take a Padawan and things to kind of do that. I'd want someone with me because I get lonely and I like people to talk to, as you could probably tell, because I'm sat in a room by myself talking into a microphone for an hour about a book. But I would quite want to be a way seeker. I really like that idea, and I think it's going to get explored a little bit more in Star Wars, because it's been touched upon here and there. And it's just that idea of kind of, there's a joke about this because, Jesus take the wheel, but it's kind of like that, but like Force take the wheel, where you just kind of put random coordinates in your ship and go off somewhere in the galaxy, or you look at a star map and something tells you maybe they're significant about this system or that system, and you just kind of go there, see what can happen. Maybe you discover something new, maybe you help someone in need or vanquish some enemy to the Force or something, you know what I mean? It's that kind of thing. So I really love the idea of way seeking. So when Orla Jareni came out in phase 1 of the High Republic, I was immediately intrigued by her. She had a white lightsaber as well, so she purified like a Sith lightsaber staff, which is really cool. I love lightsaber bleeding from the comics, Darth Vader and the Kylo Ren comics, how you make a lightsaber go red. And I love the cleansing element of it, which is obviously what Orla Jareni did. Luke Skywalker does it in Shadow of the Sith. You also get Ahsoka does it in the Ahsoka novel. That's why Ahsoka in the Rebels and Mandalorian, she's got white lightsabers. So it's a concept I love. So way seekers, crystal bleeding or purifying, any of those things, you've got me. So I said about those, and then, Xiri and Phan-Tu, as they go on, they just learn to respect each other a lot more, and this whole book takes place over like several weeks, if not like maybe a couple months. But it's all about their wedding, and it's all about them connecting with each other and doing what's right for their planets, their systems, and their people. But then they start to develop feelings. And this is, once again, this is kind of spoilery, but this is the spoilery part, so, you've been warned. But it's not like at the end of it, they proclaim their love for one another and they run together and do this big kiss and the music starts playing and light shines down and everything's all happy. It's not like that. But they do get more and more connected to each other. And right near the end, Phan-Tu does say that he loves Xiri, So it is a nice thing. And they do get married in the end. But loads of hurdles across the way. There's Viceroy Ferrell who causes problems. There's a Path of the Open Hand. There's assassination attempts. There's lots of chaos being created that tries to stop a lot of these things happening. But it's a thrill ride. And I really loved seeing Xiri and Phan-Tu's characters really develop more. It's kind of that younger generation idea where, I'm not saying this about old people, but it's generally a thing in storytelling a lot of the time, that an old person is kind of set in their ways, so you can't really change them. So you have to have the new generation come in to try out new ideas. That's the kind of theme with these two. And although they do not always agree with their respective parents, the Queen and Monarch of their respective worlds, because they have respect from the Monarch and the Queen, they are allowed to explore these ideas, which I really appreciate. You've got parents who may not agree, but they are still supporting in certain ways and do still want the best for their kids. Really enjoyed that element too. So I mentioned about the two chancellors and things, which are quite interesting. I think I delved enough into them in the prior part. So the last character to kind of delve into is Axel Greylark. Now, he is a character that if anyone saw me on Twitter, I was interacting with Blue Milk Mama, who's Jacqueline. She's really, really cool. She does some articles for StarWars.com. She does a lot of cooking regarding Star Wars and things. So I'll put her Twitter handle in the description because she's just a really cool person to follow. But me and her are having a little conversation about the High Republic and stuff because she's ahead of me. She's finished the books before I have. But one of the things that she said was she was really intrigued by Axel. And at that point, I was about 2/3 through the book. And so I gave her a little bit of a running commentary at certain points. But I was basically like, oh, Axel Greylark. In like part 1, I hate him. Then in part 2, I actually really like him because you kind of learn a bit about his backstory and the trauma he's gone through and stuff like that. His dad died. And obviously my dad passed away 10 years ago. So I always do have a little bit of sympathy when I hear that characters' dads die. Then in like part 3, you then kind of hate him. And then in part 3.5, you then don't really hate him. And then by the end of the book, you're like, I don't really know how I feel. I definitely don't like him as a person because, as I've said now for the 3rd time in this review, he is a dick. I generally try not to curse or say any words that can be construed as unpleasant words to hear, but it's so hard to describe Axel Greylark as anything else. In the book, there are loads of ways that he gets described by lots of other characters, even in that blurb I read earlier. But he's just one of those people. So he really grated on me, and I think that was the intention. But then you kind of think, oh, maybe he's got like a heart of gold in a way. But then he doesn't. But then he kind of does. Does he want to be good? I don't know. His actions say otherwise. And I think we as the reader are meant to be in the shoes of Gella Nattai. That's why she's on the cover of the book. That's why she's in the vast majority of the chapters, because you're seeing it through her lens. You're seeing this war that's been going on for 5 years that you don't really know that much about these cultures that you only have a tiny bit of knowledge about because there's so many cultures out there. Jedi can't know about everything. And you've got Axel Greylark, who kind of represents selfishness and a lot of the stuff against the Jedi Order. But equally, being a Jedi, you have to try and understand people and see the best in them. So it's a really, really interesting dynamic between Greylark and Gella Nattai. I loved that part, and learning about Axel Greylark was something I was very interested by. So it seems like his story is not yet over, and I'm just really interested to see where that's going to go, because the way this book ends, he doesn't die. And so one would assume that if they just killed him, that's kind of the end of the story, but he doesn't. So I'm interested to see, and the epilogue is about him as well. So very interested to see what they do with Axel Greylark, and if we get some more character development in a positive way, or if he goes down the plug hole, like a lot of characters do. But yeah, I just love this book, and a few more little drips and drabs of plot information before I sort of round this up, is that there are just a lot of very powerful scenes. There's one scene where a lot of soldiers have like taken over this village of innocents and then are going to start killing them, but then the Jedi go and help along with Xiri and Phan-Tu, and you get a perspective of something that you think you know what's happened. And I'll just say it, Axel Greylark carries this corpse back, and you're like, oh, he saved this person, and he was like, oh, he fell on a mine or something, and you're like, oh man, that was horrible. But then you see from a different perspective what actually happened, and yeah, Axel killed him, and you kind of get to see why. I won't, I'm saying this is a spoilery review, but I don't want to give you everything, because I do really want to encourage people to pick up this book or listen to the audiobook of it, but it's really, really good. One of my favourite tropes in movies or anything like that, especially when it's done well, and I think that in Knives Out they do it a few times really well, which is you get a scene and you get presented with information, and then you get a new version of the scene with slightly more information from a different perspective, and then you get another one, I mean, I'm basically now thinking of The Last Jedi, when you get the flashback with Kylo Ren and Luke Skywalker, like the perspectives as how Luke failed as a master. Loved that bit. I love The Last Jedi anyway, but really, really loved that part. Another element of this that I really enjoyed is the theme of loss. There's a lot of grief in this. You've got Xiri, her brother died. You've got Phan-Tu, who was like adopted by his mothers. So he had a memory of his sort of parents and things when he was younger. I can't remember if they're still alive or not. I think his mother and sister perished due to the war, from what I recall. But you've got Axel Greylark, who has still not dealt with the death of his dad, and his mum is kind of sweeping it under the carpet, and he like blames his mum for that. And it's this whole lots and lots of characters have experienced loss, and I think this book is really showing how different people in different upbringings and just how people deal with grief and loss in different ways, and how that can manifest itself in really unhealthy ways, be it addiction, be it violence, be it just being a horrible just human being in a way, or horrible person, because obviously in Star Wars not everyone's a human, but just loss does a lot to people, and so does grief. And obviously from my own personal experience that I've been very open and honest about in genuine Chit-Chat, you just kind of have to take it yourself. You have to deal with grief in the way that's best for you and that's the healthiest for you, without destroying everyone around you. And it's quite a hard thing to do, especially with younger people as well, although there are a lot of old people who it happens to, or older people it happens to, and they never recover. There's certain elements of loss which no one should ever have to experience, and things like loss of a child and stuff like that is just absolutely incomprehensibly bad. But there are elements of these sort of things that do happen. You've got the monarch of E'ronoh, he loses his son. And then Xiri, for a lot of it, has to kind of step into her now dead brother's shoes to somewhat appease the monarch, but also she's trying to deal with her own stuff as well. So lots of complicated family issues in this book, as well as war going on, as well as Jedi teachings going on, while also still building to a story in the High Republic, as well as the Path of the Open Hand being like interwoven in all of these events that are happening across the galaxy that's causing chaos and dismay. So I really like this book. When it finished, I was really, I wouldn't say surprised, but I just found myself, I couldn't put it down, and I was so enthralled and wrapped up in this political story that, yeah, it was a really different kind of book. It's been different from the other Star Wars books I've read. It's kind of got elements of Bloodline in it a little bit, but it's almost like if you got Claudia Gray's Bloodline, that's a really cool book. If you kind of mix that with maybe Claudia Gray's other novel, Lost Stars, and then interwoven that with maybe Midnight Horizon, the Daniel Jose Older young adult book from Phase 1. Those three things put together, Lost Stars, Bloodline, and Midnight Horizon, you kind of push them together and you get something not dissimilar to Convergence. So I'm really, really up for that. So I thought it was fantastic. So, this book for me gets 9 out of 10. It's just brilliant. I was going to say I wasn't going to try and review the books and things, but I think as we go on with the High Republic, where there's so many, it's somewhat easier. But I want to clarify that no matter how high or low I may or may not rate a certain book, it's not a slight in any way to any of the High Republic creators or authors at all. I'm loving all of the content that's coming out, even the stuff that I find a bit slower, and stuff like some of the YA stuff in Phase 1. Even the weaker things I think are still really cool, building up to this amazing story, and I'm enjoying it every step of the way. So yeah, that's my general thoughts. The next on the list is going to be the Battle of Jeddah, because I'm nearing the end of that audio drama, and that takes place pretty quickly after this. I'll probably do it in a similar-ish format to this, but it's going to be shorter because the audiobook, I think, for Convergence is between 10 and 13 hours, whereas the audio drama for Battle of Jeddah is about 5 or 6. So it's like half the amount. So it's going to be less to talk about, and also in audio drama, I can't break it apart in the same way because I can't reread things and my notes aren't quite as detailed and stuff like that. But that's kind of what's going to be next for the High Republic. I am also going to, now that we've done Convergence, I'll be able to do some of the High Republic comics. So there's the first volume of the High Republic comics is out now. So that's the first 5 issues, the first arc. As this phase 2 is going to be shorter, there's only going to be, I think, 10 High Republic Marvel comics. I don't know how many there's going to be of High Republic Adventures. There's also the mini-series The Blade, which is about Porter Engle, who is amazing, and they've been incredible so far. So I've got a few things coming up. There's also in April, there's also the Quest of the Jedi one-shot by Claudia Gray. That's been pushed back several times, so it may or may not be coming out. There's also the Nameless Terror as well, which is phase 2 stuff. So quite a few. There's 2 or 3 mini-series. Then there's also going to be an audio drama, 10 comics of the Marvel run, probably 2 arcs of the Adventures run by IDW Publishing. Actually, no, it's Dark Horse now, I think, actually. Sorry. I've been saying IDW for this, but I think IDW did have the All Readers comic license, and now it's gone to Dark Horse. So apologies for that if I've misspoken this episode at any point. But there's still quite a lot of High Republic stuff to go. I think all of it relatively will be out by like April's when it kind of kicks off wave 2, and then sort of May is the rest of it, and then I think June is kind of the last of it, and then I think sort of September, October time is probably when we're going to get phase 3. But I am going to be going to Star Wars Celebration in London this year. I'm going to all 4 days. I'm going to be taking my recorder with me. I'm not going to record the panels or anything. In case anyone at Star Wars or Disney is listening, I'm not going to be doing anything like that, but I'm going to take it with me, and me and Megan are going to talk about our experiences, like how the day was, some cool stuff we found out, and if I get the chance to talk to any authors or anything like that and get a little snippet of that, I'll try my best to do that too. But yeah, the next few weeks, I'm going to still be doing normal comic stuff as well. So there's the Hidden Empire crossover events that's going out. The Yoda series, the first arc of that is done. The Han Solo and Chewbacca comics have just finished. I'll be doing part 2 of that. There's also the IDW Publishing Clone Wars Battletales stuff. And then there's also the main run of Star Wars comics and the main run of Vader comics, because they don't really seem to be connecting in with the Hidden Empire crossover event at the moment. But yeah, that's what's kind of coming up over the next few weeks. There's going to be the book review for Battle of Jeddah, the audio drama, and then, yeah, I'm probably going to try and do odds and evens. So this week High Republic, next week not, next week High Republic, next week not, if you kind of see what I mean. I tried to do that in phase 1, and I'm going to try and do it now that I've got Convergence out of the way. I can really delve into some of this other content without it spoiling itself, so you guys kind of get it all chronologically. And then we've also got this year in sort of early June is the 40th anniversary of Return of the Jedi, and there's quite a few comics coming out for that. So there's Return of the Jedi, Lando, Jabba's Palace, and Ewoks. I wonder if there's going to be a 4th one, but we'll see. But I'll be tackling all of them in like one 40th anniversary Return of the Jedi episode, so you can look forward to that. But again, that's not going to be for a couple of months yet. But that more or less wraps it up, so now it's just the usual waffle at the end. So you can follow me on social media at Genuine Chit-Chat on Instagram, Twitter, and on Facebook. You can support me on Patreon at patreon.com/genuinechitchat. For as little as £1 a month, you get access to over 150 episodes of Afterthoughts. Some of them are my reviews and overviews of Star Wars Legends books. Not dissimilar to this, but they're generally shorter and a little bit less organised, and I normally record them in my car and things. So I've got the Darth Bane trilogy, Shatterpoint, Rogue Squadron, I've got Revan recorded, Darth Plagueis, I've listened to Darth Maul Shadowhunter. So normally audiobooks I listen to are usually Legend stuff. I'm also reading the Battle Scars book for Jedi Survivor. It's like the book in between Jedi Fallen Order and Jedi Survivor. So I'll be doing a review on that at some point. I'm not planning on doing a really, really in-depth book review on that. So maybe I'll do it on Patreon. Maybe I'll do it here, but I'm not going to do it in the same depth. I decided I just want to read that book more for fun, and I'll give my thoughts afterwards. That's generally what you can expect in the future with the Battle Scars as well, because I forgot to mention that earlier. But yeah, Patreon, really great way that you can support both Star Wars comics in canon, and also obviously the Genuine Chit-Chat YouTube channel, and also Genuine Chit-Chat the podcast, is just supporting me as a content creator. I've got the weekly Mandalorian episodes coming out. There's also Rebels Reviewed that we will start up again once Mandalorian's finished. I am planning on doing an episode about Bad Batch, but I'll probably do that on Star Wars Timeline with my friend Ben. So there's loads of ways to really help. You can share the show on social media. You can tell people about it. You can leave reviews on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts, on Good Pods. I've also launched my own feed of Star Wars Comics in Canon, so it's just Star Wars Comics in Canon episodes. I am still going to stay on this feed of Comics in Motion, which is where this episode will premiere out, but I'm trying to get my Star Wars Comics in Canon stuff to catch up with the feed of Comics in Motion weekly, just so then both feeds can have my episodes coming out as and when. And then if any subscribers just want to hear Star Wars Comics in Canon and they don't want to hear all the Comics in Motion stuff, although I would say, Comics in Motion's amazing, please subscribe to that. On the feed of Star Wars Comics in Canon, you get all of those episodes. It's far easier to search for them. It's easier to listen to certain episodes in chronological order, and you can just search Darth Vader, and it just comes up with every episode with Vader in. But obviously you can go to youtube.com/genuine Chit-Chat. Over there, there's video versions of my conversations with Kevin Shinnick and Kevin Scott, who are both Star Wars authors. Also other people associated with Star Wars, like Alex and Molly Damon of Star Wars Explained. Dominic Pace, I spoke with him, but I don't think that has video. I spoke with him about his appearance in Mandalorian Series 1. So there's lots of bits and pieces of people that I've spoke with. Michael McCormick, he's a puppeteer. Some of his puppets and prosthetics made their way into Return of the Jedi. He created Salicious B. Crumb, so I got a video version of him, and he and I spoke about puppets, and he made some puppets for Labyrinth and Dark Crystal and stuff, which is really cool, and he showed me some of the ones that are in the actual films. So amazing stuff on Genuine Chit-Chat. Please go to the YouTube channel. You can also find the playlist Star Wars Conversations. That's all my conversations with people who create Star Wars, conversations about Star Wars, all Star Wars, Star Wars, Star Wars. But yeah, it's a really good way, YouTube, to keep up to date with a lot of the stuff I'm doing. But obviously following me on social media is great too. Or you can subscribe to the newsletter, the Pop Culture Collective, where I'm a contributor for every week, where you get updates on the weekly discussion episodes, on Genuine Chit-Chat, on Star Wars Comics in Canon. And then there's also loads of other amazing creators. So you've got Spider Dan on there, you've got Tony Farina, you've got the Femon Collective, you've got Chris and Dave's Reality Cast and VHS Strikes Back. You've got other contributors who contribute sometimes monthly or every couple of weeks, things like that. But if you want to keep up to date with everything that I'm up to without having to follow me on all the social media places, that's a really, really great way to do it. So link to that is going to be in the description. Make sure you check that out. But I think that's enough from me, my friends. Thank you so much for listening, as always. I really hope you enjoyed this book review. Please go check out all the other book reviews that I've done if you haven't already. Check out the huge amount of other High Republic content I've been doing. Make sure you subscribe to Comics in Motion and youtube.com/genuine Chit-Chat, and then you will not miss an episode of Star Wars Comics in Canon. They come out every Saturday, and I'm going to be tackling a lot of the High Republic other stuff. My goal is to tackle every single piece of High Republic content. So I have done it so far, apart from the virtual reality game. That's the only thing I haven't tackled, because I can't warrant spending several £100s just to play VR, when I've already just spent several £100 buying a PS5 just so I can play Jedi Survivor and whatever other Star Wars games end up coming out over the coming years. But friends, thank you. I appreciate each and every one of you listening. I'll talk to you next week with whatever I end up doing. I haven't figured it out. But thank you for your support, for your listening as always. I hugely, hugely appreciate it. I'll speak to you next week. And as always, may the Force be with you. The intro for Star Wars Comics in Canon is arranged by myself, Mike Burton, and the backing music was made by Eric Matias of soundimage.org.
You have just experienced host, creator, everything elser of Genuine Chit-Chat, and also the host and creator of Star Wars Comics in Canon, found on the Comics in Motion podcast, Mike Burton.